This is Canon Fodder, episode 68, live from the hot gates of Greece. We are defending to the last man Western civilization from the horde of Persians. And with me, my shield brother in the phalanx, William Megenny. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's been a long time since I read this book. We were talking backstage about our military experience, and it seems to be on every single military reading list for enlisted men. If this is really the only time that you come across this book, I feel is from that military perspective. Not a lot of people have read it out in the world.
Yeah, no, that's what happened to me. I was actually in A school in the Navy, and I was going for gunner's mate. And one of my buddies came up to me and he's like, "Hey, man, have you read this book?" And I'm like, "No, what is it?" He's like, "It's called Gates of Fire. It's about Spartan warriors. It's a military history book. It's fucking awesome, dude. Try it." And I was like, "All right." So I read it, and like many other veterans, I fell in love with the book because it talks about just what it's like being in the military, the ups, the downs, the honor, the duty, the reality of war, and being a veteran. And it just nailed the bullseye when it come to capturing what it's like being in the military. Obviously not as intense because we're talking about the Spartans here, but it was very accurate. And it taught a lot of really good lessons that me and the guys would reference later in our service. So
There is another book that I read. Uh, it was Starship Troopers, and I did an episode with Tom.
yeah, he stole
Uh,
my idea. That was my favorite book too.
and that also is, I think that's on a bunch of military reading lists too. I didn't read it until I was out of the military for a while. But that too was well, that's not true. I read it in high school actually. Never mind. But that too is like an idealized version of military service, and I think like that books like this really do call out to young men like, yeah, struggle is awesome, and getting your ass kicked because you scratch your face at the wrong time is actually really cool. And
Yeah.
it sucks that the thing about it is like, yeah, whatever you go through sucks at the moment, but you can look back on that and say, yeah, I was man enough to do that, you know. And obviously, it's a far cry from what the military is today to what the Spartiates had to go through as children to become Spartans. Uh,
Oh yeah, that agoge is no joke. 10 years of tier one training. You know,
and you have to go out and you have to like steal. They're intentionally teaching you to steal, but will like beat you if you're caught stealing. You have to go out and kill a helot. It's really intense stuff, man. But
oh yeah,
you
lots
know,
of whippings, lots of ass kickings.
there's a reason why the Spartans then you know, became that premier military force in the world. There's a reason why we still remember them today. And it's not just because so when I was in college, I had a Greek professor, really, actually kind of renowned in the field, right?
Yeah,
But he was an Athens guy, right? So he was
oh,
like,
so he's
well,
biased.
yeah, yeah. And he was very much like, well, the Spartans weren't actually all that, uh and yada yada yada. And he really harped on because we'd gone, it was an ancient Greek history course, right? So we read Herodotus and then Thucydides, and then a little bit of Xenophon to round off Thucydides. And in the Peloponnesian War, there is a part where I think something like a couple thousand Spartiates are taken prisoner, and the Athenians are like, "What is this? I thought Spartans don't get captured. I thought they like die, before they're captured." So it's like a huge. Uh, it was this huge psychological win for Athens, and also like this horrible propaganda loss for the Spartans.
Yeah, I could only imagine.
Uh, which I highly recommend everybody read the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. It's one of the first history books proper, but it's written in a way that I think is very enjoyable. If nonfiction isn't your thing, Because I will say a lot of nonfiction is dry, but the way they wrote back then, it was like, okay, we're telling a story first,
Yeah,
and we you can be factual and entertaining and have a point to what you're writing. It's not all uh, emergent behavior and well, actually, the reason that so and so did this is because they got salt and sugar and guns, germs, and steel, and blah blah blah.
yeah. And if I
Uh,
remember correctly, didn't the Peloponnesian War take place after the Persian Greek War?
correct,
Yeah.
yes.
And so
So yeah,
perfectly encaptures how much, like, I hate to use a term, but it's accurate, frenemies the city states were. Like, they had just defeated the superpower of their time, and not even a few years later they're fighting each other.
yeah,
So
and
it's
it's
just,
funny because then the Spartans call on Persia to be an ally, and I
yeah,
think actually, if I remember correctly, the Persians helped broker the peace.
yeah. I think General Pausanias, who was the general at the time, they gave him shit and they called him a traitor because he was working with the Persians to kind of navigate all that too. So
Yeah.
I
So
can't, I might be wrong, but I believe,
no, that sounds accurate.
yeah,
And if not, and then it's spiritually true and therefore true.
yeah.
Uh, but
So I
yeah,
know
so
they
we're
gave Pausanias shit for something dealing with the Persians. So
so we're talking about Gates of Fire by Stephen Pressfield. And it's funny because he has a few different historical fiction novels. He has one on the campaigns of Alexander. I think he also has one about the other side of the Battle of Thermopylae, the Battle of Salamis, right?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
that wasn't at Thermopylae. It
No,
was
I
its
know.
own battle.
Yeah, no, I know. Salamis was it, but I'm just like in terms of the Greco-Persian War,
Yes.
that was the other big battle. Uh, and then I think it's Plataea afterward.
Yep, that was the
That
defining
is
one.
the final victory. But yeah, Salamis being the naval battle to defeat the Persians, and you have Athens burned to the ground, and yeah, it's all good stuff. Do you read a lot of historical fiction, Will?
Only once necessary. Um, I have a fiction series that I'm working on, and it just so happens that that first book takes place during this exact war. So I was already kind of very familiar with it because I spent a significant amount of time researching this era. And I researched this era, the Third Crusade, medieval Japan during the end of Sengoku period. And so I do enjoy history, but I really emphasize researching stuff that I'm directly working on. But otherwise, I'm self-taught when it comes to history. I would watch a YouTube documentary, History Channel. So, I'm pretty knowledgeable when it comes to general world history, unlike most.
Well, it's so funny because I wrote a historical fiction novel, not kind of, right? It's like vaguely historical fiction, but I don't like historical fiction as a genre for the most part. The exception to that, of course, is the war book. I read Gates of Fire. I've read what's that one? Cold Mountain, which is like kind of set in this. It's set in the Civil War, but it's like kind of a war book. And then, have you ever read The Killer Angels?
No, I have not.
Oh, that's an awesome book about the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg. The movie Gettysburg is based off of that novel. So
Oh wow.
not even so much the historical event of Gettysburg as much as uh, Michael Shara's novel of the events of that book. So
Yeah, that
really
was a good
cool
movie.
stuff.
So
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, why don't you give us some background about the Battle of Thermopylae?
yeah. So do you want me to kind of go about the story of Gates of Fire, or just dive right into
May,
Thermopylae?
maybe a little bit of background, and then we can get into the novel.
Okay, I'll make it brief. So Gates of Fire, it's told from the perspective of one of the Spartan squires, right? So there's a squire in the same sense of like a medieval knight has a squire. Spartans had squires back then too, right? And they weren't helots, they weren't slaves. They were there to help the Spartans. They often they dealt, they shot either the sling or the archer or the bow and arrow to assist in battle. But after the Battle of Thermopylae, this guy survives. And so he is captured and he's retelling his experiences with living with the Spartans, fighting with the Spartans as a squire to King Xerxes, right? And so he tells his early life, he tells what it was like living in a city called Ascatos, and how they just got raided and how his life was completely destroyed, how he ended up going to Sparta because he wanted to learn how to defend himself, how to become a man, and find meaning in the world. And then from there, he goes through the agoge vicariously as a squire to a young Spartan named Alexandros. And so they kind of become, at first they hate each other, but as they have these shared experiences, they actually become really good friends, right? And so for 8 years, they're working together. And then eventually the Persians come knocking, and that's how we get into the events that are so famous, right? And so, do you want me to go into like kind of a little bit of background of what happened with Persia in history?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to make it brief. So
No, go
Persia.
ahead. We're here. We're here. I'm here as long as you're here. So
Okay, great, because I can nerd out.
yeah, go ahead, dude.
All right, all right. So this is actually the second war between the Greeks and the Persians. The first war happened between the Greeks and Emperor Darius, who was Xerxes' father. And what happened was that there were Greeks living on the west coast of modern Turkey. And they didn't like being under Persian control for whatever reason. I can't remember exactly what it was, but basically they didn't like Persia. So they threw a fit and caused the Ionian revolts. And they were kind of kind of dicks about it, and they started killing a lot of the satraps and administrative officials and soldiers, and really, gave Persia a headache. But what pissed Persia off was that Athens and other city states lent their support, which made Greece guilty of inciting and perpetuating this revolt. So that's the crime that kicked this whole thing off, right? And so the first war, right, the Persians come in, and they are eventually defeated at the Battle of Marathon. And the Athenians and a couple of Spartans, it was really a mixed force, defeat them on the beach and send the Persians packing. And the Persians are very upset by this. They're very pissed off. And Darius swears revenge. He swears revenge. He's going to get them one day. And because of this loss, now his empire has fractured. There's, someone tried to hit the king and they actually made him bleed. Oh shit, I guess he's not as powerful as we thought it was. So it's causing many revolts that he has to put down and deal with first before he gets revenge. One of which being the Egyptians. So, and the Egyptians are still a very powerful nation to control. So he has to get them under their foot again. That delays this entire thing by at least a decade, right? Which is why Darius passes away, and that's where Xerxes comes into the picture. That one event of Egypt revolting pushed the timetable way back, right? Because it took a lot of resources. They had to just get everything back in order, and that's what leads to this 20-30 year gap. So now Xerxes, who's much more pissed off, and he wants to prove that he's worthy of his father's mantle, decides to gather up the largest army the world has ever seen. So he's calling on every single nation in his empire. Let's go. Let's get everybody. This is happening. We are going to not only take over Greece, we're going to take over all of Europe. Most people don't know that Xerxes' actual intention was to basically just stomp through Greece really quick, turn up through Yugoslavia, take over Italy and Spain and parts of France. That was actually his original plan, right? So he musters a huge army. Now, some people contend this. I honestly think the army is about 400,000 large. And I'm talking infantry, cavalry, and archers. All right.
Where do you get that number from?
This isn't my personal estimate. We know for a fact that there was about 250,000 units at the Battle of Plataea. The Greeks were outnumbered 3-1, and the Greeks had about 90,000 troops altogether. And we know for a fact that was a disparity. So this is my Will estimate, right? That because Xerxes ends up taking a big chunk of the army back with him after the Battle of Salamis, right? And so I'm thinking, okay, well, there was bunch of losses in Thermopylae, and he's taking at least 100,000 troops with him, right? And then there's troops that died with a disease and dysentery and some desert. I'm guessing frontline troops, there was initially about 400,000, probably with another 4 to 600,000 supporting, because not every army is all infantry. Like you have to have logistics and supply guys, right? So that's I honestly believe that the Greek numbers were actually pretty accurate.
And that's the thing too, is you'll find that Herodotus is more accurate than not. For a long time in historical scholarship, I was a history major in college, so I got a lot of the court historian points of view with things,
Mhm.
only for, you know, later internet schizos to correct my wrong thing. Uh, it, it's funny, they really want to believe that Herodotus was just making stuff up or
Yeah.
was being fed a bunch of bull, only for and I think part of it's also uh, my my theory on this, or you know, my thoughts on that is, if they can discredit the ancient historical or the historians of the time, it's a lot easier to then discredit the testimony of biblical witnesses.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, they're all
Like,
stupid. They didn't know what they're talking about. We have to interpret the past for you. I get it.
yeah, so I mean, I think that definitely has, if not an overt role, then a sort of subversive, covert role in explaining away the work of Herodotus, of excuse me, of not Themistocles. Why can't I think of his name? Thucydides. Thank you,
Yeah.
self. Of Xenophon, and later, you know, uh, the writers of the gospel and Paul and all them. So
Oh, yeah.
that's my theory on that. Uh,
And for me, one of the smoking guns is, this information's out there back then, right? Why are there no documents that are disputing this? At least I haven't seen any, right? Because
right.
this is, it's like if another nation like Persia, heard about that. Persia was one of the most administrative states in ancient times. They wrote everything down, right?
Mhm.
We have clay tablets of just you know ridiculous things like, so and so owes me 50 sheep. He's an asshole.
Right, right. In fact, you know, we have a lot. It's most likely that Herodotus got his information from the Persians,
Yeah.
especially when it came to numbers and things like that, uh, or at least, you know, after the fact. There's a, I think he got the story of Croesus, because Croesus was a Lydian king, and
Mhm.
he got that uh, from the Persians, if not. But I mean, that's all that's kind of conjecture. I'm sure he had all sorts of sources. All that is to say is that Herodotus is definitely more reliable than not, and it makes you think that in Sweden there probably are guys with three heads running around.
Right. And that reminds me of kind of like one of the funny things that I was came to mind when I was rereading Gates of Fire was the image of the Persians and how they really are versus how 300 depicted them, right?
Mhm.
Like, the immortals weren't these, subhuman demonic uh beings that wielded Japanese katanas. Like they weren't like that. They had gold and purple, and they wore scale mail armor, and they wore a silly hat, which was totally normal for the time, right? They looked like they were from Persia.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, we can get into 300. I know we've talked around the book so much that we might as well keep doing it.
Yeah.
Uh, 300 is not based in fact, and it's not based in Gates of Fire. It's based on a comic book by
Frank Miller.
Frank Miller, yes, who most famous probably for 300, and also for Sin City and The Dark Knight Returns. Very much a sort of grim, dark figure in comic books. It's funny. I always thought of him when I always thought that, oh, this guy is clearly like just a huge Chad. The way that he writes, he must be like just this hulking giant of a man, especially the way that he designed Batman. And no,
Mhm.
he's like this skinny, bearded freak, and I was like, "Oh, that's disappointing."
Oh, did you have to use that little grip to get his soylent out of his?
Uh, I don't know. I don't know much about Frank Miller. Is all I know is that when I saw his picture, I was like, "Oh, that sucks. But
Yeah,
yeah, no. So he writes 300, and it's later adapted into film by Zack Snyder, who I don't know what your opinion of Zack Snyder is, um, but for me, the man just needs somebody to write all his scripts for him. As soon as he's not like the visual guy, I think his work kind of falls apart.
yeah. If he has to like write the story,
If he has to
eh,
think at all,
yeah, he just
like he is just a purely vibes director.
oh, 100%, 100%. No, I'm mixed on him, Zack Snyder. Like I think 300 is when he peaked because it wasn't his story. He
Mhm.
was just retelling something someone else had wrote.
Right. Well, it's the same as because Dawn of the Dead was awesome, you
Yeah,
know, and it's unpopular, but I really liked his adaptation of Watchmen, especially the 4 hour cut.
yeah. No,
Uh,
it was good. You know, he definitely has a niche, but you know, like you said, just stick with the adaptation, and I think that's his strength. Kind of
yeah,
like
yeah.
D
I
and
remember seeing Sucker Punch as a kid, and I was like, oh yeah, no, this is cool because like the girls are sexy, but this is a terrible movie.
pretty much. And but yeah, like it was all about spectacle, right? And you know, I was thinking about it, and the way I justify 300 is if I was a Greek who survived the battle, this is how I would embellish it to really sell it.
Oh yeah, there was like a bajillion of them, and you know, I took off one of their masks, and it was a demon, and there was this big. We fought rhinos, and this giant with like sword arms, and uh, and then this really ugly imp thing betrayed us.
Yeah, what was his name?
Ephialtes.
Ephialtes, that's right. Yeah, this dick sheep herder who sold out his country for money. But
Yeah, but so yeah, 300 not historically accurate.
no.
Gates of Fire, at least reasonably historically accurate, I think.
Yeah, it does a much better job of taking you back in time to understand what it was actually like to be a Spartan. You know, it does a really good job of explaining the agoge and how that actually works and the training involved to turn a boy into a Spartan. And then it does a really good job of explaining why their society is built the way it is and why they focus on war and the thought process and the ideals that they held as a community, right? And everything they do is based on function, practicality, and reality. That's
Mhm.
kind of what I like about it, right? Because in that era, it's a very violent and brutal era. Might
Right.
makes right. End of fucking story. And the Spartans take that to heart and be like, you know what? Nothing else matters because if we could build this glorious society, but if someone just waltzes in and destroys everything we built, it's all for nothing, you know? And so they take the opposite approach where they focus just on war to preserve and to um, uh, you know, protect their society. And then by doing that, I think like Kyrgyz was the king who kind of kicked everything off.
Mhm.
He's the one who's like, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. That kind of set into motion this idea. And then all of a sudden, over time, you start building this warrior ethos after generations and generations of, you know, Spartans go into combat. They, over time, through trial and error, hone this system. And by the time we get to 480 BC with the Spartans, I think we're 200 years into the system, which is, you know, we think back then, oh, that's not that long, but America has been around for what, 250 years? So that's a really long time to hone in that culture, right? And that's why we really get to really, you know, see what is it eventually becomes this elite warrior society. And it's really cool to just kind of, you know, take your time and savor that particular culture, that of you know, really see what it means to embrace duty and then explore the honor that comes from that duty and the selflessness and the sacrifice that the Spartans embody. So it's really just very fascinating.
Yeah, and you mentioned how like Kyrgyz is probably the progenitor of the Spartan ethos, but even back to the Iliad, you know, Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother, and like sort of
Oh yeah.
the co-leader of the Greek forces in the Iliad, he is a Spartan. So that lineage goes all the way back to, you know, Bronze Age Mycenaean Greece.
Yeah. The fact that they can lay claim to that, right? It just kind of builds that culture in the same way we talk about the revolution. They probably talked about it, that event with the whole Battle of Troy.
Right. Right. It's interesting too that no, it was not. Sorry, I'm trying to think of who was from Salamis. I think it was Ajax the Greater who was from Salamis. But I might be mistaken because I was like, oh, is that Achilles? It's either Achilles or Ajax. Somebody in the comics, feel free to correct me.
Yeah, I can't
Uh,
remember where Achilles is from.
yeah. Anywho, so the book starts with our main character, and he's from where is he from?
He's from Askatos.
Yes.
It's a city on the west coast of Greece, the like the boring side that nothing ever happens, right? But he's over there, and his city gets attacked by a neighboring. I can't remember the name of it, but they get absolutely destroyed by a neighboring city.
Yes. So Xenos.
Giannis.
Yes.
Giannis. They call
So
him Zeno for short. So it's
yeah.
Zeno.
So he's like one of very few survivors. Him, his cousin, and this old slave,
Brexus.
Brexus. Yes. And I it's funny when I first read this book, I was on watch in the army, and the watch officer came over to me and asked me, what are you reading, and how do you think, because this was on the chief of staff's reading list, right? And all I could say is, there's a lot more rape in this book than I thought there'd be,
Holy shit, dude.
which is not something that he expected 18-year-old Private Hudson to say. Uh,
Yeah, I'll say.
but I wouldn't be me if I didn't stick my foot right in my mouth. But yeah, no, there's a pretty. It's not gratuitous, right? But it's. I think even it's just very plain. It's like they raped her.
Oh no, yeah, they make no offense or buts about it.
The three are escaping, and I think it's even oh, what city are they from? Hold on, let me pull up my. You speak for a minute while I pull this up.
They're escaping the city they got raised that they're from is called Askatos, and they're just trying to survive in the surrounding area. And they're probably about 150 miles west of Athens.
Argives. They're Argives.
They're Argives, yeah, that's it.
Yes. So the Argives, they find the three of them walking on the road, and they're about to kill the old man and Xenos, and then for some they start going into they start doing a ritual, actually. So they all sing the song as Zeus, Savior, spare us, who march into your fire. Grant us courage to stand, shield to shield with our brothers. Beneath your mighty aegis we advance, Lord of the thunder, our hope and our protector. When the hymn was over, the men raped her. And she's older than Xenos in this part, but she's only 13 years old. So she's uh I guess of age for the time. But yeah, so this is a 13-year-old girl who basically offers herself up in order to save the lives of Xenos and the old man. Uh, so very, very, and that's the thing about Pressfield, especially, is he will go down these routes and flesh out the world, and it doesn't necessarily lead anywhere, but it just shows you what kind of world uh we're living in this book. what
Yeah.
what did ancient what was ancient Greece really like, or at least our best approximation of it.
And it really paints, the picture to my earlier point, why the Spartans were so fanatic about wars, because they didn't want this to happen to their family, to their brothers and sisters, to their countrymates. And this is it. Really, he does a good job of showing you, well, if you fuck this up, this is what's going to happen to you. It really sets the stage to as to help underscore that motivation for the
Yeah,
Spartans.
it's funny too, because like when the Argives finish up, they give them food and wine, And then
Yeah.
they tell Xenos is like, listen, if you don't want, if you stay away from the cities, or this is going to happen to your cousin again. Also, ditch the old man; he's going to get you killed.
Yeah, yeah. It's they're complete dicks about it, and they're like trying to be helpful after they just destroyed everything. It's such a weird mindset, and which is funny because Brexus ends up saving both of them anyways. But yeah, it's a wild time to live in, and Pressfield does a really good job of showing the horror of that era. You know, we take it, we live in America, and so we take this peace for granted, to be honest with you, right? And other parts of the world deal with some of this stuff, and ancient Greece dealt with it all the time. And so the Spartans really understood that, and that's really, I think, one of the underlying motivation, one of the threads of the underlying motivation, because people like Zio go to Sparta and they're like, oh yeah, our city state didn't really give a shit about war, and everybody got fucking murdered, and
Right.
everybody I love is dead. And the Spartans are probably sitting there like, holy shit, yeah, we better train even harder,
Yeah, and so the reason that the Spartans also can train so hard is because they have the Helot population. They enslave the Messenians or
Oh yeah.
Messenians, the other great people of the Peloponnese, right? They are enslaved. They are the slave class of Spartan society, and we see several times in the book how awful it is to be a Helot. In fact, during the Agoge, if you want to graduate, you have to kill a Helot.
Yeah, it's they weren't exactly thinking about human rights back then.
Right. But this is one of the things that made the Spartans distasteful to other Greeks, because they're like, all right, listen, we all like to take slaves here, but we don't enslave fellow Greeks.
Yeah, it was the taboo, and the Spartans, they obviously didn't give a shit about that.
Eh, and yeah, when you can say, come say that within range of my spear. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's funny. Like, even though they had that going on, there were still people who would want to go live in Sparta, right? As they're a little crazy, but there was a logic to them, and Zio kind of displays that logic. He's like, well, I want to learn how to be a man and take care of myself, but there's no place safer than Sparta.
and it's also important to note that Zio, uh, he is crippled from the attack on his home village, so his hands are misshapen,
Mm-hmm.
and
They drove
he's
spikes through his hands.
yeah. And he actually has a vision of Apollo telling him, "Oh, you're going to be a bowman," which is a cool, a cool part at the end. I think it's at the end of the first chapter even, that happens.
Yeah, it's early on where
And
he gets.
I think later on during the battle, he's a peltast or he's an archer. He's one of those.
Yeah, he's an archer. At the end of the last battle, he's like shooting dudes almost point blank with his bow and arrow.
And that's the thing too about 300 that's inaccurate. There were 300 Spartans, right? And then a few thousand others.
Greek.
Whether
Yeah, it was a Greek allied effort, right?
yeah,
There was
so
six thousand total.
yes, yeah. So it wasn't just the 300 Spartans. I think there were it was something like what 3,000 Thespians there, and then probably lesser Spartans like Zio were there as well.
Yeah, there was
And
it was a mixed force.
but 300 sounds a lot better. So
Yeah, it sounds a lot more epic, right? 300 against a million. Ah, so,
and
but no,
it was close for a while there.
it was close for a while. That's how awesome we are. But no, I like. Speaking of that, like battle, the way they did it, I thought was way more interesting in Gates of Fire than in 300. Because
Hmm.
in 300, it's like, okay, we're gonna clash a few times for the camera, but the way Pressfield describes it, it's a 3-day battle, right? And for the first 2 days, essentially what they did was they narrowed the gap with a makeshift wall. They show that in the 300, right? That's
Right.
probably true. But what they do is they take turns going against the Spartans. And so you imagine you and your buddies are in a small division, and you go against the Persians, and you fight for about an hour or two, and then you to exhaustion, and then you rotate out, and then the next guys come in, and they keep fighting. You're rotating, 3 or 4 times in a single day, and it's kind of like this machine that just keeps on rotating. So you always have fresh Greeks on the front to compensate for the vast Persian numbers, right? And so because they were able to do that, I think 6,000 Greeks were able to murder like 25 to 30,000 Persians in just 2 days. There was so many bodies on the floor that they were stepping on the battlefield became bodies. Like they were stepping on people to fight the battle. That's how insane it was.
Right. It's like you hear about the First Crusade and how the blood that ran in the streets of Jerusalem was ankle deep, maybe even knee deep.
Yeah.
Not sure how much I buy that particularly, but
I did like there was a moment that stuck out to me where Zio is trying to save one of his comrades on the first day of battle, and one of his comrades got wounded really badly, and or I think it was the second day, and as he's trying to pull him back, kind of Saving Private Ryan style, he's got him by the lapel, and he's stepping backwards, and he slips and eats shit, and he thinks it's a river of water, but he looks up, it's a river of blood. And he's like, whoa, like and it's not like a giant river, but it's it's enough to slip on something. So I thought that was pretty wild.
what's also really great about, first of all, we have to talk about the way that Spartans just are and the way that they were raised. Uh, in Athens, you have the eloquent speakers, the debaters, the philosophers, right? Spartans developed their own way of speaking that is we now know as laconic, right? The brief brevity is the soul of Spartan wit, I guess,
Yeah.
and they have to they are trained actually, and it's funny because you see this in Navy SEALs too these days, and other special forces guys. Did you ever see oh, what's the Chris Kyle American Sniper?
Yeah, I did actually. It's a good movie.
Yeah, so in American Sniper, uh, there's when they're going through buds, you see that the instructors are asking them stupid questions, and these guys are cultivating a bravado by answering, uh, in trying to think badass and answer badass, right? There's like they're freezing, and somebody asks, hey, what about you, Kyle, old man? How are you feeling? And he's just like, dangerous. I'm feeling dangerous, or and that goes all the way back to the Spartans. A lot of the really cool lines that you see in 300 or you read in this book are just taken from uh, the original Greek, right? The book opens up with the line uh, about Dionysus or Dionysus.
Yeah, either or.
Uh,
Dionysus.
and Herodotus talks about how Dionysus was quite undaunted. Or sorry, I'll read the whole thing. All right, this is how the book begins. This is the epigraph. Although extraordinary valor was displayed by the entire corps of Spartans and Thespians, yet bravest of all was declared the Spartan Dionysus. It is said that on the eve of battle he was told by a native of Trachis that the Persian archers were so numerous that, when they fired their volleys, the mass of arrows blocked out the sun. Dionysus, however, quite undaunted by this prospect, remarked with a laugh, "Good, then we'll have our battle in the shade." And that's that, or come and take it, right?
Oh yeah, that's become
Which
a
is
very
like the
famous.
the big, the Second Amendment. Every Second Amendment guy in America, that's his response whenever gun control is brought up. Come and take it,
Yeah,
right?
mow along
uh,
Bob A and it has a little picture of a Spartan helmet on a guy's bumper sticker.
right, exactly, on his lifted truck that his wife drives around to get groceries. uh, Anyway, or what's that other one? What's the other really famous one? Ready your breakfast and eat hearty, for tonight we dine in hell.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. The one I remember was after this battle. It was a little bit later, during Alexander the Great's time, right before Alexander the Great took over. It was his father. I can't remember his name, but he sent a letter
Philip.
to. Huh?
Philip was Alexander's father.
Philip. That's right. Yeah, Philip. But he sends a letter to Sparta, and he said, "If I send my army to Sparta, we will conquer you all." And then the king sent back a one word reply: "If." And, and so he's like, "Yeah, never mind. We're gonna go the
Yeah,
other way."
yeah,
So,
yeah, never mind. And it's funny too, because like the Spartan society by the time that Alexander's around has just plummeted, right? Birth rates have because the one thing about an ethno state, folks, is everybody is related to each other after a while, right?
yep.
So the Spartans trying to keep their bloodlines as pure as they did, but also just honestly the crop of Spartans decline over time just because that is the nature of systems is decline. You had I think even by the time of Alexander the Great, you had maybe a couple thousand Spartiates left.
Yeah, there wasn't very many. I do
Uh,
remember there was an earthquake, wasn't there, that killed a bunch of Spartans that really
that yeah,
decimated
oh,
them?
that might be true as well. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you're right.
it was both.
Um,
It was both at the same time.
but all that is to say that even with deplenished numbers and their stellar martial reputation kind of broken by that point due to um, you know fighting in the Peloponnesian War, then losing to Epaminondas and Thebes at the Battle of not Electra. It's something like that though. Um, and Thebes sort of becomes the dominant power in Greece for a while. And then Epaminondas teaches those tactics to Philip, who was his ward, and then the Macedonians take over all of Greece. Uh, and that's where Alexander gets the improved phalanx system with the really long spears, whose names that name escapes me right now.
Yeah,
Not the
they were
poly.
what, like 20 something feet long, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah, because the ones the Spartans had were 8 feet. So
Yeah, and it's cool too because they actually uh, because the spears were just in the way and they were just this massive block. They actually blocked arrows from hitting them as well.
oh, really? I didn't know that. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
I know they had those little tiny shields, right? Now they didn't have the big Aegises that back in the day, but they did have smaller ones.
yeah. Well,
Kind
when your spear's long enough, you don't need a shield.
of, yeah. Apparently, because he took over all of Persia,
Yeah.
and he got all the way
Uh,
to India, didn't he?
yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see what else we got here because I mean honestly the book is like whatever in terms of there's some themes here which I know that you want to discuss, but it's not this great work of literature, right? So there's not a lot of depth that we can go into except
No.
talking about how cool going to war is sometimes.
Well, I mean, if you're going to compare it to some of the greatest literary novels ever written, then obviously it falls short. But I did see a quote on a website that I really liked, and it says that it's a basic military instruction manual. It's
Mm,
masquerading as a novel, right?
right,
And
right,
I
and
really enjoyed it.
there are a few such novels like I mentioned Starship Troopers before.
Yeah,
Is very much of that school of thought.
yeah, and I think one of the best stories from Gates of Fire that really exemplifies why it matters to embrace duty, to honor your teammates, to be selfless in battle is there's a battle where Alexandros and Zio sneak and watch, right? And what's happening is that this is before the Persians arrive, and the Persians have already declared their intent to go to war, and a lot of the city states are kind of freaking out, and they're going up against the Spartans because the Spartans are like, no, 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 you should fear us more than you fear the Persians, and we're going to make you go to war on our side. And so they go to battle, and you see the stark contrast between Spartan discipline and this other Greek undisciplined army. I can't remember the name of the city state, but basically, when the Spartans go to war, all their shields are perfectly shined. All their movements are perfectly coordinated, like that robotic, that military drill, right? And what it's doing, it's displaying their prowess and their training and their dedication to the craft of warfare. And there's this sense of camaraderie. Everybody knows each other. There's this utter confidence that's displayed on the battlefield. That's a weapon. And so when you contrast it to the other side, right? People who don't train, right? They're bakers and blacksmiths, and they grab their helot gear, jump in the hoplite formation, and just kind of wing it, right? They're pissing and shitting themselves because they're so scared. They don't know the guy to the left of them. They don't know the guy to the right of them. They're just kind of there, right? They have no camaraderie. There's no brotherhood. They're just kind of doing it because they have to. And so what happens inevitably, the Spartans march forward as this just juggernaut of phalanx against these basically cowards, and the entire line falls apart. And it's a great way to demonstrate what actually happens when you don't have the training and your mind game set up. One group absolutely out dominated the other, right? Because the spears that they were using were relatively the same. The armor that they had was relatively the same. It wasn't necessarily like that much better, right? But the difference was staggering, and that really highlights and emphasizes why that mindset of training and discipline and duty is so important, because then you can take that and you can honor your comrade on the battlefield instead of throwing your shield down and running the fuck away.
Well,
Which
and
is what
it's interesting too because you have throughout history, it seems like the force that is super dedicated and super motivated and volunteer always succumbs to the sheer numbers of the conscripted, sort of less well trained, but just massive, uh, just throwing bodies at the problem
the Soviet
solution.
method of warfare.
Right, right. But you even you see this with the or not the Peloponnesian, with the Battle of Thermopylae. You see this with the American Civil War. You see this in World War II, right? With the Soviet the Eastern Front. You even see this with oh, what's it called? Uh, damn, why is my brain being like this today? Uh, they did. Yeah, this is stupid, but the Tom Cruise film, The Last Samurai,
Oh yeah, yeah.
where they directly reference Thermopylae, uh, and you have the proud Japanese samurai warriors uh, losing to the unskilled sort of just line troops of the new Japan.
Yeah, those Gatling guns
Right, right.
just absolutely mogged them.
But yeah, you always see it still doesn't beat that you would rather fight for Sparta than the Persians, right? Just as a guy, or even as a young man, and even maybe as an older man.
Yeah,
Nobody wants to be on the side of the conscripts.
no, absolutely not. But like you said, what was that one admiral? Oh, there was an admiral I saw who basically said that quantity is a quality all of a
I thought
sudden.
that was Napoleon.
Was that Napoleon?
Yeah, I thought that because he had the Grand Army, and he had what I think, like, he had something like 300,000 men at a time where warfare was very specialized.
Yes. And he Napoleon is another favorite of mine. We could go for hours on him, but he
Yeah, we'll just do every single Total War game.
every single war game ever made. This is even a 10-hour podcast. But no, even then he trained his army really well too. So they
Right.
weren't just conscripts. They were because everyone else had muskets, everyone else had cannons, and they were still getting shot at. The maintaining that formation in line is still super important as well, right? There was still a lot of overlap between ancient warfare and revolutionary time line warfare.
Well, and the thing with Napoleon too, the reason that he was able to win the way that he was. He was an artillery officer, and he revolutionized the way that artillery is done.
Oh yeah, he I think in his first battle, he was able to time the artillery and duck under beneath them. So every time they shot, the cannon rounds would go over their head, and then eventually he just charged and took that position overlooking the bay.
Right, right, and it's funny too because you have that strategy is used in World War I to disastrous effect.
Oh yeah,
Because
because they
you'll
have
have
those have machine
the
guns.
creeping artillery barrage, and then you'll have the guys in the trenches following the barrage, but the rounds either fall short or there's a miscommunication, the timing's off, and you just get a bunch of guys killed by their own artillery.
Yeah, the machinery and the math was not that precise yet to be doing that back then.
But it's funny because Napoleon was able to get it done, but that is lost by the time of World War I. Even I wouldn't be surprised even if uh, with our modern technology there would be this it would be kind of disastrous.
Yeah, I could see that. I know one of his main strategies was the hammer and anvil strategy that he learned studying ancient warfare, and so I think a lot of his cannoneering was tailored to that, you know, and using the cannons to kind of smash his opponents on the battlefield, as opposed to just kind of using it as support as everyone else, you know.
All right, well, I don't have a whole lot more to talk about in terms of the book, but I wanted to get your thoughts, and I wanted to make sure you had ample time to tell everybody about your projects and everything you've got going on.
Sure. Well, I have a book called The Secret of Success that is out available on Amazon. I'm working on its sequel, Secret of Happiness, Secret of Wealth, which will be out eventually. And then I'm switching to fiction, and I'll be working on a couple of oneers, right? Just the unique stories that I have in the pipeline, and then I'll be working on two series that I have. One is called Phoenix Fall. The other one's called Aegis of Imperia. So be on the lookout. It's gonna be a while for those, but I'm really excited. Really, really excited about those.
As for us over at the Double Dealer, you know where to find us. DoubleDealer.substack.com. You can become a paid subscriber, get your own episode of Canon Fodder. And, you can either give me your hidden gem favorite that I've never read, or you can torture me with some really stupid gay book. But it's your choice. So I'll read it regardless. I am become horror, the Schiller of books. Uh, I have a few books out that you can buy as well and read. You know where to find those over on my Twitter. I don't really know how to end podcasts, so I will say insert ending here.